Sometimes when you're mixing drums, you just need a little bit more something, and it's kind of hard to qualify exactly what it is. Reverb isn't really doing it for you. You just want a bit more life to these drums, a bit more kind of soul, a bit more room maybe. But using reverbs, using room reverbs can have its kind of downsides. There's one way that I know of that is really great for adding some vibe and adding some character to a drum kit. It's bus processing, and it's just using one plugin. And more than that, it's kind of just one knob on a plugin. So let's just take a look at what I'm talking about. So the plugin in question is the Pulsar 1178. Now, this is a kind of I guess you could call it like a stereo 1176 with some more features. One of the features we're going to come on to in a moment is this sidechain EQ. But really the knob that I'm talking about here is the release control. Now, on an 1176, 1178, we turn it clockwise, so all the way to the right, to get it faster, and we turn it counterclockwise to get it slower. It's kind of the opposite from all the other ones. But just take a listen to this before and after, and I'm going to disengage the plugin and then bring it in. We're not really compressing, we're not really peak reducing that much because we're only at like 40% mix. We're just adding some life, some soul, and some sustain to the drums. Check it out. Okay, cool. So parallel compression, as I'm doing here, where we have a compressor or a compressed version of a track kind of underneath the original dry version, it's nothing new. You know, people have been doing this for years. But I feel like this release control is probably the most important on a compressor in general when you're kind of dealing with this sustain element. And I'm going to show you exactly why. So on this compressor, we've got our input and output, we've got an attack, and we've got a release. We're going to come on to this in a moment. Take a listen to how it sounds when I turn the attack all the way to the left, so on a slower setting, and then all the way to the right. It's making a difference. It's making a significant difference, admittedly. If you have it all the way to the left, so all the way on its slowest, you're letting the peaks through to an extent. And around there, you're really smashing down on stuff. So I like it over around here. Just listen to the release though. To me, this is far more of a difference. This goes far more into that night and day category that people really talk about. And annoyingly, when people talk about night and day, I don't know, often, especially on YouTube kind of stuff, what they mean by night and day is like nighttime and a bit later in the nighttime. And it's never quite as cut and dry as that. It's never quite as simple as like black and white. To me, the release gets as close to as kind of a black and white thing in this compressor as we can get. So I'm going to take this all the way to its slowest setting first and then just bring it up, and you're going to hear all that sustain just go whoosh. Just there on its kind of most extreme settings. On the attack, once we got to like 5 and above, we're really noticing a difference. With the release, everything on these settings, anyway, everything from like 0 to 5 is kind of, okay, little bit, and then you get above 5 and it's like, wow, okay, there's the sustain. So let's start off on like 4 and bring it up, and let's hear that supposed night and day. Now, night and day to me is like black versus white. This isn't black versus white, is it? But this is about as much of that as you can kind of get in one plugin on a drum kit, and unless you're like distorting it madly or whatever. It makes a big difference, is what I'm trying to say. It's there. So it adds a lot. Now, on this compressor, as with many other compressors, you can adjust the output. So we're maybe running a little bit hot. So let's just take it down just so we're making that fair AB, which in YouTube land and really in audio is very, very difficult. Bring the mix up. Okay, now with the mix higher, we are getting significantly louder, so let's go down a bit. You hear that sustain that it's adding to the kick and to the snare drum. That's what it's all about. That's how we add that kind of sense of space and that sense of, yeah, sustain. I can't think of a better word for it, really. But in this compressor, at least, so I'm going on 4:1 ratio. If you go at a higher ratio, then you're probably going to get a little bit more of an accented sound. But really, the release is where it's at for this compressor. I love it. Check it out down below, by the way. There's a link down there. The EQ, the sidechain EQ, right? Sidechain EQ. There's a lot of things that a sidechain EQ can do with a compressor. If you're a Logic user, I'm pretty sure I made a video on that. Check it out down the bottom or at the top, if I remember, which I normally don't. But we can essentially tell the compressor to kind of listen to a certain frequency range and react more to it, kind of, because you're feeding more of it into it. So in this, we've got a handy graphical display here as well. So if I just hit play, you see the kick around here, the snare around here. So let's say, for example, we want this compressor to react more to the snare than it currently is doing. Well, the way we can do that is we can just target the frequency range that the snare sits in and shove a load of that into the compressor. And we can just audition this sidechain if you want by hitting the little headphones, click and play, and then bringing this up, and you're going to hear kind of what the compressor is hearing. Okay, that sounds pretty horrible. So by doing that, we can tell the compressor that we want it to compress more on the snare. Or, I don't know, is it simpler than that? We're kind of just putting more into the compressor, aren't we? So by default, the compressor only hears what we feed into it. So by feeding more of the snare into it, it's going to compress that snare more. If we start with the sidechain EQ off, we're going to kind of have what we had before. Then by sending more of the snare into it, or more of that frequency range, it's going to slam down on that snare just a little bit more. So that's kind of attacking the peaky stuff. That's making it so that we're chopping off the transients a little bit more. Watch this peak reduction meter as I bring that EQ off and on. You're going to see the snares get a bit more peak reduction. About 6 dB on the snares, and then on the EQ, loads more. And we can do that in a few different ways. If we change the shape of this, let's make it so it's, whoa, not that. Let's make it so it's affecting the bottom end. Why have you done that? Okay, I've never encountered that before. Whoa, weird shape. Hang on a minute. Let's go crazy. It's because the Q's gone mad. No, let's take this to 1. There we go. All right, so let's just tell it to not listen to the top end, or let's tell it to listen to the bottom end. So just shove a load of bottom end into it, see what happens. Without it. Or the opposite way. So by doing that, we're putting less low end into it. So it's not going to be compressing the low end as much. And the thing that I've kind of realized about compression is that the attack and release constants, you're really kind of managing what it is compressing and what it isn't compressing. Or more accurately, you're kind of managing how quickly you go back to no compression. I know that makes complete sense with a release control. That's kind of what it is. But really, in terms of what you're hearing, the compressed sound versus the non-compressed sound, if you want a little bit more of the natural kick, then yeah, the wet dry, the mix can do that. But by adding a bit less of the frequency area that the kick kind of sits in into the compressor using an EQ like this, you can tell it to not actually clamp down on the kick as much. And we can do the similar thing with the snare. Previously, we just shoved a load of it into it. Now we can kind of take it out. Before. Okay, I think we're getting a little bit hot now. I think we got a little bit too much goodness in there. Nice. So you can see how that release control really does alter stuff. And depending on which kind of frequency range, which instrument, I guess you could say, you shove into the compressor more or less, you can affect how it's compressing. And this is obviously going to be a bit different if you've got different ratios going on. So we're at 4:1 at the moment, which it's not really a gentle ratio, but in terms of this compressor, it's the gentlest. What about if we go to all buttons in? No, let's not do that yet. Let's go to 8 first. So we'll kind of scurry through the ratios. Back to 4. Okay, big difference up at all buttons. But remember what I said about the release kind of being the one that has the biggest difference? Just have a listen between 20:1 and 4:1 in this scenario with a mix at 40%, yeah. There's not a massive difference there. But with the release, bring that all the way down or to its slowest. To me, there's a far bigger difference there. And if we go to something crazy like all buttons in, that release, the difference there is going to get significantly bigger. So there you have it. The Pulsar 1178, I like it. I think it's a cool compressor. I think it's got a lot of great features. I've not even gone into the saturation here. I've got that off because I'm being really extreme, and saturation, well, it saturates and it can kind of distort at extreme settings. So I think the release control is the kind of MVP of the compressor. It really is such an important control that can really change the sound so drastically. In this scenario, far more than the ratio did. And really far more than the attack did as well. The input and output, I'm kind of keeping out of that running, I guess, because of course if you're shoving a load more into it, it's going to compress more. Like that's just logic. Sorry. But I think the release control is really important in the compressor, and perhaps the most important of all the controls. What do you think? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you again soon. Take care.